So you're seeing schools play better defense in terms of keeping the guys that they really want, that they think are going to be the impact players. On the flip side, you're also seeing schools playing offense too. Who are saying, hey, you know what? Here's the reality of the situation. You've been here 3 years. You haven't cracked the 3D. We need immediate impact help. We are probably going to get that out of the portal.
Welcome back, or welcome to Y Option. I am your host, Yogi Roth, as always, joined by co-founder of Y Option and immaculate executive producer, Jim Thornby, fresh off his first Big Ten championship game, same as well. It is Heisman week. We had Heisman finalist from 1997, Ryan Leaf, on earlier this week. A phenomenal listen. He also recaps his year with the Beavs and the Cougs. Today, we have Brandon Huffman on, who is an expert in all things recruiting, 24/7 national recruiting editor. He is dialed on all things high school and the portal. That is a really fun interview. And Jim and I, after today's episode, are packing our bags and going back to the cold. We are going back to the cold, even further east than we were a week ago. Jim, 2 weeks in a row, we'll get to hang out, which was really fun. So the Heisman is coming up. We're gonna have Brandon on in a little bit. How are all things on your end this week?
Good. I mean, everyone should get excited about this Brandon Huffman interview because it is literally a PhD in recruiting in the modern era. It's college. College football is in a really wild spot right now, and he is no better than him to be able to put all of that into perspective.
Jim, in the last 24 hours, I've talked to a coach, former head coaches in the NFL, former head coaches in college, current executives in the NFL, current executives in college, current coaches in college. And there is one prevailing sentiment, which is there's really no perfect way to go attack this thing, right? You're looking at Stanford. They bring in Andrew Luck to be the GM overseeing the head coach. You're going to other schools who have GMs that are truly negotiating contracts with agents, acting as attorneys to a certain degree. You're seeing some throw down on high school recruiting. You're seeing coordinators leaving schools and presumptuously bringing their quarterbacks, all while the portal is open. It's chaotic to a large degree, with revenue share seemingly in the horizon, in the viewpoint moving forward here in a matter of months. So I'm curious for you, as the season has ended, does it feel like a cloud comes over the sport? Do you feel like, no, it's just a new frontier in the sport? And then, of course, we'll dive into the Heisman here in a minute.
Well, it's funny because I did kind of laugh when you said college executives, because like that's that is the new thing now. Like that is a reality in college football. And is it a cloud? Yes. Is it a dark cloud? I wouldn't go there yet. Because it's in a sense like you're kind of blocking out the sun a little bit because you're not really sure what's going on right now. But it's not the storm clouds riding in with thunder and lightning and everything else yet. Yeah, we'll see how this all because no one knows. I mean, we're in uncharted territory, and so it's literally people are kind of making up the rules as they go. Or not.
It's a good point. I think there's a couple things to track that's getting no play. But let's just go back to when I was coaching at USC, because Brandon's going to reference it in our conversation. We're talking, little less than 20 years ago, and the staff was, I think it was 8 or 9 full-time coaches, a couple recruiting staffers. Pretty much everybody had a seat at the big staff table. Now you go into those rooms, and not only is there like the back row, but there's the back row to the back row, and then the standing room only to the back row to the back row. Like, we're talking over 50 people. And now we're talking about GMs that are getting paid, whether it's Courtney Morgan at Alabama, Andrew Luck. Like, these are high 6-figure, maybe even 7-figure jobs. I mean, this is coordinator-esque type money. And I think that's getting lost in here to the point of the executives that you chuckled at a little bit of, like, this is becoming a real NFL model. You used to hear, like, when Jed Fish took over at Arizona, it's a pro model. Well, now like everything is a pro model. And I think it's a really interesting dynamic because players are clearly getting paid. There's about to be pseudologically set revenue sharing to rosters based on the money made in media rights deals and provided through athletic departments. I think there'll be a little bit more transparency with the roster changes. And it doesn't have anywhere near the calendar structure that the NFL has. And I think that's the biggest issue. And as I've talked to the people that I referenced earlier, the biggest issue around that calendar is still the element of, are you an amateur? Are you professional? Because we still have to go to school. Like there's still, and that to me is the one thing that is so far down the line in the discussion, but is a part of this conversation and this new world order in college football that I think is impacting it and making it chaotic. I think there's a way you can make this thing entertaining. There's a way you can make this thing structured. I think there's a way you can provide some discipline around it, but it has to do with the calendar. And right now, the calendar is chaotic based on academics. And I think that is a very, it's a dicey situation. I'd be curious to see where it shakes out. And I think 24 months from now, the waters are calmer. I think right now it's people still, it seems like it's been 2 years of people trying to figure out the next move in college football.
Yeah, and I think there's one thing that I've noticed because I spend a criminal amount of time online. The reaction as each of these names go in the portal, on Monday when the portal opened, or even beforehand, as you saw people saying they were going to go in the portal. Every time you see a player, announce that they're going in the portal, invariably, like the comments are all like, "Oh, the coach dropped the ball," blah 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 blah. And as Brandon will kind of put into context here later in the interview, a lot of that, it goes both ways. Like because of the money now, and like, you're like, "Oh my God, this starting linebacker is not going to be there anymore." Well, maybe the coach decided that the amount of money that this player is wanting is going to be better spent on a left tackle or a new quarterback or what have you. So I think right now, and it's the internet, so of course, it's nothing but crazy reactions right off the bat without really giving it an in-depth thought. But it's like, just wait, like let's see what your rosters look like in March.
Yeah,
because player X, player Y, player Z may all leave. But as we've seen with Colorado, as we've seen with Arizona State, like, and to a lesser extent, as we've seen at Washington, massive turnover of the roster in all three of those as the coaches come in. And you kind of have to let it kind of develop and see where it's all going to go and not overreact to, "Oh, this player left, we're going to be terrible." Like, it's because it's free agency. It's NFL free agency right now. So like, you're just going to get a different team next year, and you'll see what kind of coach you have at your respective program as they're able to then turn all these new players into a cohesive unit and move forward.
Yeah, I think Utah's a really unique example, right? Isaac Wilson, an Elite 11 quarterback, highest rated quarterback that place has gotten out of high school in quite some time. And you would have thought, when I called their spring game in April of last year, or I guess of this calendar year, he's going to be the future there. It's going to be Cam Rising for a year, and then here comes this huge recruit whose brother is in the NFL, who's got a huge name and broke a bunch of records in the state of Utah, blah, 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 blah. And then it starts to just play out earlier than we anticipated because Cam Rising gets injured. And now here we sit, and Isaac Wilson's in the transfer portal. Rumored Cam Rising not going to come back, let alone two other quarterbacks that came out of that quarterback room. And it's just a reminder of my favorite line that Chris Peterson has ever shared with me about college football, which is the only guarantee. He would tell this to every one of his recruits at Boise State or at Washington. The only guarantee in this sport is that it is not going to go exactly as you planned. And now it's even more dramatic. And what's going to be fascinating as you see coordinators get hired, their players are often going with them, especially their quarterback. Cam Ward is the best example with Eric Morris. He goes from one school all the way up to Washington State, right? And thrives there. Eric moves on to become a head coach again at a different school. And then Cam goes to Miami. But that transition that I think is real, jumping up a level, sometimes oftentimes they will be aided by going with your quarterback, even if it's at the same level, bringing that guy along with you. And you're seeing like package deals, or at least presuming package deals. I've talked to enough coaches that hire coordinators that as they are evaluating them, they are curious who's going to come with them. And it's just the state that we're in within the sport. So there's no point in fighting it. But I think it is noteworthy because the inverse also happens. Let's just say quarterbacks, because it's a sexy position. You're also going to go to a brand new place. And I wonder, as I watch at Elite 11, you were there this summer, Jim, the development of the position is at an all-time high. In college, my thesis is the development is starting to slow down because it's 1 year. Like Malik Murphy is a great example. I love Malik. Came out of high school, went to Texas. Didn't win the job there, but developed there. Went to Duke and balled there. And now he's going to go to another place. So what system is he going to? I don't know the coaching trees enough of like where somebody from Duke's offense might be going or where somebody from Texas back in the day is going. But regardless, he's going to go learn another system, which you can say, well, that happens in the NFL all the time. You're exactly right, but not for those that thrive.
Right.
Very rarely for those that thrive. And it's still the most developmental position. And that's why I think as we bridge to the Heisman, it's so impressive to watch Dillon Gabriel do what he has done. Right, because he is in his 6th year. He has the most starts in the history of college football with his most recent one, breaking that record in the Big Ten championship. And he's just going to continue to grow that record with the pending Rose Bowl on January 1. But here we go. We got our Heisman final.
I was going to say, that is an amazing segue right there.
Yeah, take it away. Where do we net out here?
So Monday afternoon, they announced, or Monday or evening, depending on what part of the coast you're at. But here on the West Coast, it was in the, just before 4 o'clock. On the West Coast. So they announced the 4 finalists and in alphabetical order to make sure that they're not giving anything away here. So first was Oregon quarterback Dillon Gabriel, who was the preseason betting favorite to be there. It's fifth Heisman finalist for Oregon. Second straight year their quarterback has gone to New York. Travis Hunter, who is now the current betting favorite for that award. He's the first Colorado finalist since Rashaan Salam won it 30 years ago. He's the first player ever named a finalist for the Biletnikoff and Bednarik Awards in the same year. The only guy who was a true mostly defensive player to ever win this award was Charles Woodson in 1997. Obviously, Travis does both, but he would be on that level if he came to win this award. Then you got Ashton Jenney out of Boise. Second time a Boise State player has been named a finalist. Kellen Moore in 2010, who finished 4th back then. I thought it was interesting. He's the first G5 Heisman finalist since Jordan Lynch in 2013 out of Northern Illinois. First G5 running back as a Heisman finalist since LaDainian at TCU in 2000. But this was, I thought, really interesting. He's the first running back to be finalist since Bryce Love in 2017. I mean, I know that this is thought of as a quarterback award most of the time, but to not even have a finalist since then it was kind of amazing. And then lastly, even those first 3 guys all obviously currently play on the West Coast. The 4th guy played on the West Coast last year, Cam Ward out of Miami. He's the first Miami. This is another one that kind of blew my mind. He's the first Miami finalist since Ken Dorsey and Willis McGahee both went in 2002, the year that Carson Palmer won it. And the last Miami guy to win it was Gino Torretta in 1992. So you think about like the history of Miami football and you think of all these big names, like it's crazy that it's gone, over 20 years since they've had a finalist in that mix. So I have no real issues with, obviously I was surprised a little bit that Cam Scadaboo was not one of the 4. There's not one necessarily where I bang the table and I'm like, yeah, he deserves in over one of these other guys. I think those were the 5 guys for sure. And Cam just happens to be, I would think we'll find out on Saturday night. I think he's going to wind up 5th in the voting based on this. I think there's 2 kind of based on everything, all the conversation, 2 far and away guys above everyone else. But I would have liked to have seen Cam get that invite, but now they're just doing the top 4 every year. So yeah, I thought it was a pretty good representation, but it's going to come down to those 2 heavyweights at the end, I think.
Do you happen to have the odds in front of you, the preseason odds of who was supposed to win it?
It was Dylan. Dylan was the favorite. I know that it's funny because Travis was not even top 20. I don't think.
Wow.
So
That's crazy.
he's clearly ascended in that remark. And obviously his teammate Shador is probably someone who's going to be in the top 10 in the voting.
Yeah.
I would imagine he's probably going to be just below Scatterby. Maybe he's the number 6 guy on the list. But yeah, Travis was not the favorite. Dylan was the favorite going in. I think that when you look at all of Dylan's numbers, the two numbers that stand out are 13, number of wins, and 1, the team ranking.
Yeah, I asked that for two reasons. One, there were whispers out here in Hollywood about people trying to pitch a documentary in the preseason following the Heisman favorites. And I never think that's a great idea because the only Heisman preseason favorite to ever win it was Matt Leinart. And I think that was 03, 04. So it just doesn't happen. Why doesn't it happen? Because often whoever that projected Heisman winner is, the whole season, it's easy to kind of pick that individual apart. They didn't have a Heisman season. I mean, how many times have you heard that about Dylan Gabriel? He didn't have his Heisman moment.
Yeah.
Well, he's easily on my Heisman ballot. Easily on my Heisman ballot. What I'm really curious about is, we've talked about this a few times, where does the West Coast vote go? Does it split?
Yep.
Where's like Tyler Warren? Is the South backing Cam Ward? What is the Dion effect to this? I just think it's. I'm going to be so curious to see what the numbers look like. Like, where is Cam Ward? Like, and if they won and played in a championship game, would he have had a different push? And should you have to be in a championship game? Like, should you have to be on the best team? Or are you the most outstanding player who exhibits excellence with integrity, which is the definition of the award? I think it's all different for the 900 and I believe 35 voters. Here's one thing that I would love to see we probably won't see in New York City. As Ryan Leaf shared with us, former Coug quarterback, when he went to New York after the Heisman, at the end of the night, he was bartending with Gino Torretta, the Miami winner. I highly doubt we're going to see Cam Ward doing that at 3 a.m. Maybe we'll see his dad singing fight songs with past Heisman winners. I'd love to see some of that because it was just an incredible listen of memory lane. Make sure you check that out at yoption.com. I want to take you through my process as a voter. It was gut-wrenching for me. I waited until Monday. And I've never done that. I've always done it like Sunday morning. You know who you're going to vote for and away you go. Sunday morning, I was in Bloomington, Indiana with Kurt Signetti and company on the flight. I didn't know if my Wi-Fi was going to go out because you got to have all these authentication codes. And I didn't want to like try it and then fail it and not go to a smartphone. So I waited till I got home. I got home late Sunday night. We recorded Monday morning and I did it after that. And I was torn. I was really torn for a bunch of reasons. One is I think Dylan Gabriel's had an outstanding season. I know how hard it is to play quarterback. Known him for a long time. We're with him this summer. I think the way he's played, the consistency he's played, and then the moments he's had to rise up, he has. Most notably, 4th and 9 at Wisconsin, if you wanted a Heisman moment, or 3rd and 2, ice the game with your legs against Penn State. I mean, there was a lot, I think, of collective moments for him. I think, too, Travis Hunter from the first game at Colorado, if you remember that game at TCU, what did Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, say in his post-gamer on the field? He is him. Yep. These are the 2 best players in the world. Like, he was promoting them for the Heisman in advance of them even being in consideration for the Heisman. And I do believe that Travis Hunter is an elite player. You know, if you go to Y Option's Instagram account, you'll see my categories, how I evaluate. One of them is what I pay to see a play. I pay to watch Travis Hunter play.
100%.
When you go watch, let's just go running back, Cam Scatterboo, Ashton Genty. Like, you watch those 2 on tape, they're totally different styles. Like, and you can see them both thriving anywhere in college. And neither team has a first-round bye. It's not even close if those 2 guys aren't playing. Now, Cam missed a game. Do you add that into it? As has Travis. I think you have to, when it's that tight, I think, go to some of those things. And then I just go to my eye. And I'm not a fan of, well, if you played in this league. You watch Boise State's star running back play, he would start for anybody in America, folks. And it ain't close. He'd start for a lot of teams that are playing on Sundays too, and he will. So I think there's something notable for there. So I was torn there, even added Tyler Warren into my consideration. So I had 5, 6, 7 players that I was really going through my 10-point checklist on. Eventually netted out. We'll see how it shakes up on Saturday. We will be there in person, Jim. I can't wait for that. And away we go. We'll see how it impacts everybody afterwards too. Like will it set the nation on fire? Will people care as much? Will it drive people in the CFP? I'm sure a little bit of both.
Ready, set, dream cabin nestled in the woods. Just 4 hours to go. New job halfway across the country. Butterflies before a first date. Wherever you go, 76 fuels all the ways you go, go, go.
I think from what we've seen the last month or so on social media, we know it will drive people crazy, one way or the other. Because let's be honest here. I think it's going to be either Travis or Genty.
Yeah.
Just based on everything that's kind of happened in the last month, and I think it basically comes down to what do you think is the Heisman winner? Like, is it just the overall best player in college football? I would say that has not always been who has been selected in the past. Now, that doesn't mean that that's going to be the precedent for this year as well. As far as just best player, is probably Travis. But I would say there's the argument that if you take Travis off of Colorado and Ashton off of Boise State, Colorado will definitely take a step back. Let's not overdo that. But they have a very talented wide receiver core. Now, defensively, they would probably really be hurting without him. But Ashton has gotten this Boise team to a bye. They're already in the quarterfinals of the college football playoff. Obviously the whole format has changed and everything else. So we don't need to relitigate, where Boise is in this. But Boise does not sniff that without Ashton Genty. That is 100% fact. So it'll all just come down to perspective from people on what they truly value as what the Heisman winner should be. And it doesn't have to be, like there was a lot made about, Travis not being one of the 3 Thorpe finalists. And I think there's an argument you can say that he wasn't one of the 3 best defensive backs in the country, but he could still win the Heisman even without that. Yeah. You know what I mean? I think each award has its own unique kind of qualification to it. And I think that's what kind of makes it cool.
Yeah, I think that you're spot on. And I think that everybody's definition changes every year, right? To your point of the last couple of weeks, it's been a 2-horse race. Well, I push back on that a ton because I think that's not what the award is supposed to be. For people deciding who the 2 that are against each other, well, why? Let evaluate the whole thing. I'm on the table for Dylan Gabriel in a huge way. You're replacing another Heisman finalist. Yeah, you're on the number 1 team in America, but you showed up there and within 8 months, you're able to play at a premium level, have navigated this team through a ton. You've got an it factor through the roof. There's a realistic where I look at it and I'm all right, if they give it to Dylan Gabriel, I'm cool. And I kind of feel that way about all of them. I say the same thing for Cam Ward. This is a guy this time last year was going to the NFL. And then he reversed course and he goes to Miami. And in a short amount of time, they become the number 1 offense in America. And without him, they don't win a bunch of close games. He was outstanding in so many regards. So I think the only gripe I probably have is that I was pushing for 5 guys to go. I think in this era, the more people to have the experience, the better. We've seen 3, we've seen 5. I just love that because why not? It's kind of like when you're debating who should be the number 1 or 2 pick at quarterback, who's the best recruit, who's the worst recruit. I think it's okay to have 2. It's okay to have 5 because it's so hard. And I think that's what's unique about Travis is it's such a unique situation for him. I say the same thing for Tyler Warren. It's so unique to see what he's done at tight end. Your point on not only Ashton, but also Cam Scatterby, hasn't been a back invited into the room in a handful of years. And then Dylan, it's kind of a quarterback award. Well, he and Cam have thrived. It's not even close in terms of who's the next quarterback. People might argue for Shedeur Sanders, but I would say it's kind of 1 and 2 with where the Heisman finalists netted out. So let's lay out what we're going to do, Jim. We show up late Thursday. Friday, we will be there. What do the players go through? I think people might be curious before we get to our interview with Brandon of what goes on those 2 days.
Well, they have as far as like dealing, they do a lot of stuff with ESPN. I mean, like, they're going to run them through the gambit, but that's keeping them away from all the rest of, the common media. Like us, yeah. But they do on Friday have a media availability where all 4 guys come into the room at the same time. And they have 4 tables kind of placed around the room, and everybody can just kind of go up and do the scrum around each one of them. So it's a good opportunity to get some time with them. I think that's a 30-minute window that they have for that, where you can kind of get some time with each one of those guys. Which is a really cool thing. And then they go off and you don't see them again. And then they come back the next day, do a similar thing, before they head off to the ceremony. All the rest of the media still stays at the hotel, where they do the press conferences and everything else, because the media is not in the room. That is just for, that's for the TV show. And then when that's all over, the winner comes back to the hotel, does a press conference there, and then whisked off the rest of the night. So I mean, I've only been the one time when Caleb won, and that was an incredible experience. I mean, USC had a bunch of the former Heisman winners there as well. We got to have do a breakfast with all those guys that morning, which is such a unique experience that I'll never forget. But it's cool. Yeah, it's gonna be a fun time.
Yeah, it'll be a blast. We'll be doing a ton of content. I'll be there with Jim, of course. We'll be sharing out everything we can to Y Options channels. Also going to be on Big Ten Network Saturday night after the ceremony. So tune in to that. And also we made a really cool partnership with Threads. So make sure wherever you're getting your social media from us, you're connected to Threads on Friday and Saturday. We'll be cranking out content. So speaking of cranking out content, our guest today, that's all he does. Like his wrists, his fingers need to break because Brandon Huffman has been typing and evaluating for the majority of his adult life. He knows the sport as well, if not better than anyone we know about, especially in recruiting. He is currently the 24/7 national recruiting editor. He's joined this podcast every single year around this time to talk about signing day. Signing day was a week ago. Nobody really paid a lot of attention because it was championship week, rightfully so. The portal where we sit this week is officially open for business. So on behalf of our founding partner, 76, which is always keeping you in the know on the go, we brought in our good friend, Brandon Huffman, to talk all things recruiting, signing day, high school, and yes, we dive deep into now the reality of college football, which is driven in large part by the transfer portal. I think you'll really enjoy our conversation with Brandon. Pleased to be joined by the aforementioned guru of all things sport, college football. Of course, you know him as 24/7 national recruiting editor, Brandon Huffman. I know him as a great friend and somebody I've known for almost 20 years now, and an annual visitor on this show. It has a bunch of different forms. This is your first time at Y Option, man. Really excited to have you. First and foremost, how are you doing? What is life like? And where are you coming to us from today?
Yeah, so I'm in Nashville right now. We just wrapped up our Transfer Portal Palooza show on Monday, which came 5 days after we shot our signing day show from Fort Lauderdale. So this is my last trip of 2024. But hey, the good news is I went over 100,000 miles without leaving the country. And, it's the little things that add up. And I don't mind it because it's fun to talk football. And, what a crazy week from last Wednesday to the portal and then the championship game and the playoffs in between. I mean, this is a wild ride that we were so used to being in early February.
It is a wild ride, and I love that you're coming to us from like the corner office of Adam Stanko, so make sure you tell him hello. Steal one of those mints that he has on his desk as well, man, on your way out. But to that point, can you, because I think signing day has come and gone, and obviously there's no national letters of intent anymore. It's financial aid agreements. The landscape has shifted. There's financial agreements that are now coming from schools differently than collectives. Can you just give like the high level bullet points of where the world stands as we talk on a Tuesday, as the portal just opened up officially and signing day, to your point, was less than a week away.
Yeah, take everything you ever knew about the transfer portal, about signing day, about what they signed and when they signed it, and just throw it out the window, because this is, with conference realignment really going into effect in 2024, the expansion of the playoff, it's fitting that you had the calendar change up in December from the early signing period going from the third Wednesday of the month to the first Wednesday of the month, and then the portal opening after this signing period went through, coming on the heels of the conference championship games, which that had been the case the last couple of years. It had gone on the Monday, but now you got 12 teams rather than 4. So maybe we saw a lot of guys go in the portal, but maybe we didn't see as many impact guys go in the portal because they're still in the playoffs. But everything has changed. And I always say that, this is my 22nd recruiting class that I've covered. It changes every 3 or 4 years, but really since July 1st, 2021, college football has changed. And that was, of course, when NIL went into effect. That was the fall that the transfer portal went from you had to get in and then get a waiver to play immediately to then being able to play whenever you want to then you had unlimited transfers. That's where we're at in December of 2024. If you had been living in a cave for the last 4 years or 5 years, let's say before COVID, and you're coming into college football now, you would not recognize it.
Yeah, you wouldn't recognize it. So when you look at, what you do, which is now has only grown, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're so dialed on the high school prospects that are being recruited. Now you are ultimately as dialed into the portal guys that are transferring. Where have you seen colleges net out in the last week in terms of strategy, high school building foundation? I think we would all agree that like the tighter culture you have, the better chance you have to win. But there's people like Dan Lanning, Kenny Dillingham that clearly are able to morph new faces into a culture and find themselves in the playoffs. I'm kind of curious when you look at the bigger programs, and we're always coming from the lens of college football through the lens of the West Coast, how teams have approached high school and portal regarding roster management.
That's the same West Coast that provided 3 of the 4 playoff buys.
I heard about that.
Yogi.
Yeah.
It just means way more out West if we're just looking at who gets to sit out that first round. I think schools are doing a much better job playing defense in keeping their rosters together on one hand. The other caveat that we forgot to mention was 2025-2026 season is when the rosters go to 105. So you're seeing a lot of guys going into the portal these last couple of days that had been on campus maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years, that hadn't played significantly. They're not going into the portal necessarily because they want to. In a lot of cases, those tough conversations were had over the weekend. And if you were, an Arizona State, a Boise State, an Oregon, a UNLV that was playing in a conference championship on Friday and Saturday, you didn't have those conversations until Sunday because you had games to play. You wanted those guys to at least be locked in. But now you're seeing more guys going to the portal. So you're seeing schools play better defense in terms of keeping the guys that they really want, that they think are going to be the impact players. On the flip side, you're also seeing schools playing offense too. Who are saying, hey, you know what? Here's the reality of the situation. You've been here 3 years. You haven't cracked the 3D. We need immediate impact help. We are probably going to get that out of the portal. So that's why you're seeing a larger amount of guys going to the portal on Monday, because they've essentially been told you need to start looking elsewhere. But you didn't see as high profile of names go in the portal because schools are doing a better job and understanding that revenue sharing, if it's passed by the House, will come into play in the fall. So schools are doing a better job of keeping their big name guys. Remember a year ago, you had Kyle McCord going to the portal like the morning of, 10 days after he took Ohio State on the brink of beating Michigan and going to the playoffs, or at least the Big Ten championship game. You didn't have those big time names like you did a year ago happen on Monday. And that's because schools are now, saying, hey, we want to keep these guys. And you got 12 teams that are in the playoff. You might see bigger names go in after that first round of the playoff games are done and 4 schools their season comes to an end. You might see another round within the 4 days after the quarterfinals. But for right now, it just seems like a lot of names that are, I hate to say this because these are kids that they were trying to fulfill a dream playing college football. But schools, in a sense, and this exact phrase was said to me by a general manager, we're cutting the dead weight.
Okay. All right. So a lot to follow up on. Let's just stay on the portal. We'll get back to the high school kids in a minute. I'm also seeing starters leaving, entering the portal, right? I saw a tackle at USC who's been a multi-year starter enter the portal. And I'm wondering how GMs are approaching the roster management and the financial side of it. Like, do you see places slotting a certain amount of money? Let's just be a for instance here. Let's just say I want to pay a right tackle $750,000, and that's what we have budgeted here. But school from another part of the country says, well, we'll pay you 1.2. Like, are you saying that's why starters are leaving? Is it purely financial? Because that's what's surprising to me, is watching, like, call it an above average player, like a starter at a Power 4 big time school, multi-year starter, saying, hey, I killed it. Malik Murphy, I've thrived at my institution, but now I'm going to go. And that is the part to me that I want clarity on before I offer a jaded opinion on. Maybe is probably the most appropriate way to say that.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, Malik Murphy's a perfect example, because you have Malik Murphy and you have Cam Ward in two very similar situations where they both went to ACC schools coming into the season. Cam Ward had been a starter for 2 years at Washington State, whereas Malik Murphy was the backup to Quinn. You have Arch nipping at your heels. When Malik left a year ago, it was to just get tape. It was to just get film in live reps. A year later, now he's leaving because he's got that tape. He's got that film. He was just at Texas. I mean, everything's bigger in Texas, right? Nothing against Duke. Manny Diaz did a phenomenal job this year, took him to a bowl game. But we watch Duke football to kill time until Duke basketball starts, right? That's what Duke fans have said for years when they were a miserable football program. So Malik Murphy, in that mind, he got the tape. Now there's going to be a major Power 5 school that's probably a quarterback away from being a playoff contender. They just need a quarterback who's got experience. And one thing that we was seeing with the portal this year is schools were valuing productivity over projection. They wanted guys who actually had film, that had been productive at their, again, a lot of guys went to the portal yesterday without film, but the names that went in are guys that were starters at their school. A lot of the bigger names, I should say, that have the film now to make them attracted to schools. So in the case of Malik Murphy, it may not be financially motivated, but it's Malik Murphy motivated. Now I have the chance to do this. On the flip side, look back to Oklahoma a year ago. Dillon Gabriel had been the starter for 2 years. He had done a fantastic job at Oklahoma. Jeff Lebby leaves. They want to go with the youth movement. Then they go to Jackson Arnold, and two programs end up being directly impacted by Dillon Gabriel leaving, even though he was essentially encouraged to leave. Oklahoma has a 6-6 season, fire their offensive coordinator in the middle of the year. Dillon Gabriel is the number one team in the country's quarterback and a Heisman finalist. If Dillon Gabriel is told, hey, you know what, you're going to be the guy again, even though you've been the starter the last 2, we're going to give you your number 3. What does Oregon do? What does Oklahoma's season look like? So in a lot of cases, it is financially motivated. A lot of cases, it's, I guess the best way of saying that, there's no real one specific answer. There's 3 or 4 different sizes that fit all rather than one. That said, when it is a starter at a major program, usually, you know, if it's a blue blood, it's, hey, you've been good, you've been fine, you've been starting, but you weren't good enough. We're going to replace you. And so I think, you know, in some cases, that's what's being told.
Yeah, that's the part that I think is perplexing to some fans, and even me as an analyst. I'm looking at like, hey, you've been a highly productive player. You've been a multi-year starter. Well, why are you leaving? And it's either because you don't have enough money, or you're not willing to pay what somebody else is willing to pay. And then I wonder, for the athlete, is it financially driven? Do they, like, when you talk to players, like, where does like the degree fit in? Like, they're probably close to that. Where does like an alumni base fit in? Or should we all just kind of, you know, I think we all love the pageantry of college football from what we see on game day, but should we kind of be transitioning out of that of, hey, like at the end of every year, players that have produced, to your point, are always going to look, and we should just get accustomed to that. And you're probably not going to have the budget, whether it's revenue sharing budget, your collective budget, whatever the budget is, you're probably not going to have the budget to pay everybody, because somebody's always going to be able to pay your tackle a little bit more because you're paying your quarterback a little more. And you start looking at it like that. Is that kind of the way that you're seeing GMs even approach 100%. This situation?
No, I think you hit it on the head there, Yogi. I think that's going to be something that's going to have to be managed by these head coaches. You know, it used to be that assistant coaches, position coaches, as you know, the DB coach would go recruit the DBs. The area recruiter would go recruit that area. the coaches have very little involvement in comparison to years past. It's now assistant recruiting directors, personnel directors, general managers. When it used to be the high school quarterback, his high school coach would be the one, or maybe his private coach would be the one talking to the offense coordinator at the school he's at. The communication is now between his people, and by people I mean his agent, his circle, his marketing director, talking to the head of the collective, talking to the general manager. There's very little communication between the head coach, the OC, and the quarterback anymore on the front end. It's now business driven, and more power to them. They've earned that opportunity to do so. It's why, people say, oh, there's no tampering going on. Well, yeah, by letter of the law, it might not be, the head coach at State U calling the kid and saying, hey, we want you here when you transfer. But it might be the head of the collective, who's not an employee of the University Athletic Department, reaching out to the player's, high school coach or his marketing team or his agent saying, hey, if this opportunity arises in 3 months, is he interested and what's the price tag to do so? All right. So that's where the communication is now happening. And you see this a lot, and this as having been a part of, quite possibly the greatest recruiting head coach the West Coast has ever seen. And those kids would always just rave about when Pete Carroll came in for the in-home visit. What we haven't seen much in the last couple of weeks, Yogi, is those pictures at Christmas time, right next to the Christmas tree, of the head coach and the offensive coordinator and a kid at the in-home visit, because we're well past that stage. It's business people. It's the classic Southern California, have your people call my people. That's how it's evolving. So the relationship is transactional in so many ways now. And so it's not the coach developing the player or the player going to that school because he wants the coach to develop him. It's now driven by the market. And so as a result of that, you're seeing the portal being impacted, and you're seeing the numbers. Really, at the end of the day, these coaches are now going to have to massage and say, hey, yeah, our quarterback's making more money than our left tackle. So if our left tackle leaves because he feels disrespected by our quarterback, which is no different than the NFL, where the quarterback's the highest paid player, we have to understand that we got to have a backup plan in place, because it now becomes a measure of respect. And the people that are in that kid's ear are probably telling them it's disrespectful that quarterback who you keep protected for 12 games is getting paid more than you. That fogs the brain up. And now the kids go, well, yeah, I got to get out of here.
Which ideology do you subscribe to more? Build my roster with as much talent as possible, even if let's just take the quarterback room. You're going to have 5 guys in the same room, players in the same class, or class after class after class. Or, hey, let's have 3 in the room. Like David Shaw used to always tell me that, like have enough room for everybody to breathe so they feel like they have an opportunity. Or third option, let's just go get a guy every year. Mm-hmm. Let's just go get a guy, because we know that, to your point, they're already proven on tape.
Yeah, I mean, that's really changed, right? Where you would take a quarterback where you're like, hey, we're not going to get an elite quarterback because we just got Andrew Luck this year. So we just need to go get a guy who wants to value the Stanford degree and wants a great experience. And he may play his junior, senior year. I think back to one of the recruitments that I refer to this one all the time. When Rashaan Evans came out in 2014, UCLA was one of his finalists. They said, you're going to be the starter. Anthony Barr graduated. Auburn, where his dad played, said, you're going to be the starter. Nick Saban says, yeah, you might start your senior year, but we got 5 guys just like you that you're going to have to play behind. So we'll see you in 3 years. And he chose to go to Alabama, started like 1 game his junior year, started his whole senior year, was a top 10 pick. Those days are done. These kids aren't waiting 3 years to play. So you would like to go get a guy, but you also have to understand that with the shift to an NFL style model, the days of having 5 quarterbacks in your room are probably dwindling to, if you have 3, you're probably going to be fine, because with revenue sharing now, the third string quarterback's going to think, I need to be getting a pretty good piece of the pie because I could be starting somewhere else, but I'm here to provide depth and be developed.
Okay. So let's break down revenue sharing so people have a clear understanding of what it is. My understanding is that everybody's going to have the same set of money, whether it's $18 or $20 million, to divide as they choose appropriate within their roster. Is that accurate? That's fundamentally what. So most people think that that's going to quiet the crazy tide right now, because everybody's going to have the same amount of money. What's your thought on that, and what's reality around that?
I think the reality is you're still going to see the rich get richer, because the collectives are still going to be involved. They're still going to be able to offer NIL deals. They're still going to be able to offer sponsorships at the local car dealership or at the local, restaurant. The difference is that the donor fatigue where you're asking a school to say, hey, we just gave this head coach an $80 million extension. Now we want to fire him. Can we get $72 million from you guys to pay his buyout? Oh, by the way, can you also chip into the collective so we can get a left tackle and a pass rusher and a receiver and a quarterback? Now the schools will be like, you know what? You're on your own. You're the one that signed into that contract. Go pay that buyout with your rich TV contract. All right. We want a quarterback. We want to win. If that coach, you signed him, but we will go do what we can to get you the pass rusher you need, the tackle. So there's still going to be NIL as a result of it. But schools are going to have to dictate. Let's say, I think Martin Jarman said that the school is going to use between $21 to $25 million across the athletic department. Let's be honest. The majority of that's going to go to football and men's basketball and probably women's basketball. And let's be honest, the majority of that's going to go to football because that's your biggest roster. That's where your biggest moneymaker is going to be. You are now going to have to essentially find a capologist, if you will, from the collegiate ranks. And then that's going to be known throughout the rest of the locker. Now, the reality is I have a college-age son. I had a college-age daughter. I know that, they like to exaggerate their things. So I'm sure guys are going to be bragging about how much more they're getting than they really are. But all that's going to do is cause even more conflict. Well, he said he's getting $3 million. Why am I only getting $250? And you're going to have to go back. So now you're going to have to say, with our $20 million that we have, let's say 18 of it's going to football, we got to figure out a way to get 85 guys fed. And with the rosters increasing 105 scholarship guys, the SEC said, we're still only going with 85 scholarships. There's going to be 20 walk-ons because any walk-on you bring in, he's not going to have to be held to the revenue sharing. But you still got to pay those 85 and you got to distribute it how you see best and understand that the punter and the long snapper aren't going to make what the quarterback is, but you've got to manage that locker room to not say, we've got all this money going into this one guy and it's our quarterback and he's thrown 11 interceptions and only thrown 7 touchdowns while my middle linebacker's out there, getting 19 tackles and 4 tackles for loss and he's making a quarter of that. That's how you got to now manage the egos in that locker room. And that's why you're seeing more teams go to this NFL model of a general manager and personnel and scouting assistants and essentially bringing in. And it's why Stanford was so innovative with Andrew Luck. It's not just a general manager to, let's make sure that we've got portal. Hey, Troy Taylor, your DB coach isn't doing well. Your running backs coach isn't doing well. By the way, this is how much we have. We're spending too much here and there. You're going to see more oversight just like that.
Wow. Amazing. The GM role. As I've talked to other people in the industry, they're like, this is a real thing. And I've talked to ADs,
Absolutely.
This is a real thing. I promise we'll get to high school players in a minute. The role of the GM in your eyes, like some, it could be an advanced recruiting coordinator. Some, it could be your leading negotiations. Some, to your point of Andrew Luck, it could be oversight of the program. What do you think is the best value if you were to define the job? Because there's a world where I'm like, I'm hiring Brandon Huffman to be my GM. He knows every player in the world. Why would I not get a guy who's that connected, a Brian Stump? Like, you start thinking about the people that I think could do this. But I'm curious for you, what would you paint as the job description for a really successful GM of a power program?
If everything that the description is sounding like for Andrew Luck, I think that is where we're going to go. And I think it's brilliant. Where Stanford has taken their share of a beating for not being modern and not doing transfer portal as heavy as other schools, not playing the NIL game. But they've got kind of the innovative mindset of let's have a guy who's going to be in charge of coaching management. I think that's ideal. But the reality is this is no longer about evaluations. It's not about, finding the best fit. It will be at Stanford. It will be at a Duke, at a Northwestern, where they're, hamstrung a little bit. It'll probably still be at Clemson because of Dabo's philosophy. But the reality is it's going to be business driven. It's going to be market driven. So you're going to need when you look at the NFL general managers, they have to be savvy businessmen. They're working with agents that are all, by the way, NFLPA certified, and guys that understand they can get their certification stripped away and they're no longer an agent. You also have to, find what your team needs are, get on the same page with your director of player personnel, with your head coach, and find out, will this guy come in as a free agent fit? Will the draft, this guy we want to draft, will he fit? In college, your general manager is essentially making and breaking business deals. He's brokering deals. Sure, he's managing the roster, but he's also now got to say, what's that guy's number? Okay, we're taking him off the board because that's ridiculous. He's not good enough to get that. Then he's going to have to deal with, a lot of agents. And yes, you do have your Athletes First, and you do have your CAA and your William Morris's and Rosenhaus Sports agents that are NFLPA certified. But you have a lot of guys that basically have an Instagram account and, can't even rent a car, but they're now representing a lot of these players. And now you've got a general manager in college who's dealing with an uncertified player agent who's getting 20% or so off the top. And so now it's a lot of ego massaging of the player you're trying to get to come there.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think about, like, because I hear like the player massaging. So let's just say I was an Elite 11 quarterback and I go, which is a premier quarterback camp, ran and contributed to the book, 5-star QB. I'd advise every parent to read it. Ton of advice in that book. If you are an Elite 11 quarterback, so premier QB, you go to a place, let's just say you don't play for 2 years. You do not have that tape like Malik Murphy. What is your value in the portal? Like where, because I feel like that, like people often talk about like the JC player being left in limbo or the high school player. I think like the quarterback that doesn't play for 2 years is an interesting predicament because they want to go somewhere they're going to be guaranteed to be the starter. I don't know if Malik Murphy was guaranteed the job or not, but he was the guy. And then what are coaches talking to you about in that regard when it comes to those players that are highly regarded 2 years ago, but haven't been on the field over the last 2 seasons?
Yeah, I mean, unless your name is Arch Manning, right? You probably, after being the backup for 2 years, aren't going to have the leverage and pull that you think you are. A Matthew Sluka had a lot of pull because he did well at Holy Cross. Curtis Rourke did well in the portal because he had a lot of success at Ohio. If you were a backup who's waited 2 or 3 years and you maybe saw some spot duty here in a blowout and you're just handing it off, what do you have to show for? And, I had really good film in high school. Yeah, that was 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So that's why you see a lot of quarterbacks dipping out after maybe a year or two rather than sticking around to year 3 or 4. The idea of a quarterback sticking around, I mean, when you see starting quarterbacks being willing to leave, that should tell you that the backup quarterbacks are able to read the room pretty quickly. And that's, I mean, a perfect example is Utah. Okay, Utah has lost 4 quarterbacks in the last 96 hours. With the report that Cam Rising is looking to leave and play somewhere else for 2025, it kind of comes on the heels of Jason Beck being hired as the OC, Devin Dampier going into the portal, likely following him. But they got Luke Patari graduating, Sam Hugh goes in the portal, Isaac Wilson goes in the portal, Brandon Rose goes in the portal, Cam Rising is now likely going into the portal. So you lose 1 through 5 on your depth chart. You've got a perceived guy that you think is going to come in, but who's going to be the backup? If you're a portal guy, you now have no high school depth. And if you're a backup and you're transferring, are you going to go there knowing that, hey, this guy's OC is the new OC. He's going to be the starter. So if I'm transferring there, I'm going to be back. I should just stay here. So that's what makes it harder. And so, and it's a great question because on Friday I had a call from a quarterback who's at a Power 4 school who hasn't seen the field in 2 years, and he has not gone into the portal, but he's saying, hey, the coaches that recruited me at these other schools years ago, they're not there. Do you think that they may want me at this school? And there's a general panic now happening. I have nothing to show for it other than my high school film, which was 2021, 2022. And it's a what have you done for me lately business. So those backup quarterbacks are now finding I had all the attention coming out of high school. Now I'm pleading. But the issue in a lot of these is, in their mind, they're still a Power 4 quarterback. Worst case, they're a G4 quarterback. Instead of just saying, you know what, I'll go to the FCS and play. I want to play. I want to get on the field. I want to get behind center and lead my team down the field. I should go look at a Big Sky school. I should go look at a Missouri Valley. In their mind, I could still play on that Saturday primetime game and at that level in front of 100,000, not in front of 5,000 in freezing cold blizzards.
Yeah, that's why, like, if I'm one of those quarterbacks, like this new look Pac-12, I think should be a hub. Like, go to Washington State, go to Oregon State, go ball for 2 years or 1 year, whatever. And if you need to go achieve that dream, go achieve it. So here's my question for you on the high school kid. Give us a sense for the market, right? Let's just pretend I am a Elite 11 quarterback in high school and I've got a chance to go to a power school. Okay, I want to know what that offer generally might look like at a big time school. And then give me, you referenced Dampier, right? Like what is an offer look like for somebody who's bald or played at a high level at a non-Power 4 school who has that film? And I'd be so curious what those two things look like.
Well, I think a great example of that question is Cam Ward. Granted, Wazoo was in the Pac-12 a year ago, but he kind of set the market 3 years ago when he left Incarnate Word to go to Washington State with Eric Morris. Now, remember, there was a bunch of hubbub about how Wazoo was giving him, their collective was giving him a truck. All right. Think about how harmless that looks now compared to 3 years ago. It's like, oh, yeah, you only give him a truck. That's the only reason he came here was because of a truck. But now you have a year later. Okay. John Mateer has not gone into the portal yet, but Ben Arbuckle did. He's now the OC at Oklahoma. Cam Ward, who John Mateer backed up, is now thriving at Miami. So does Mateer, who with 1 year of film, now become a very heavily marketed quarterback? Yeah. Is he going to get what Cam Ward did? Maybe not, because there's the questions about how good of a passer is he when he's a real good dual threat. But if you're good enough, a school will overpay you because they think that that's just that one missing piece. High school quarterback. So I talked with an agent, and he said, it's just like the NFL. The three most in-demand positions, really there's a fourth now because wide receivers, believe it or not, are now creeping back into that priority. But it goes quarterback, edge rusher, offensive tackle, wide receiver. If you're a running back or middle linebacker, there's not as much value in you. But if you're a quarterback, receiver, offensive tackle, edge rusher, there's going to be more value. There's a reason you're seeing a lot of guys make that jump from the FCS level or the G5 level, because they do have the film to prove it. If you're a receiver, you're going to be fast no matter what. If you're a fast receiver, you're fast in FCS, you're going to be fast in the FBS. So that's why you're seeing the productivity become more important than the projection. That's why schools are more willing to go take a group of 5 quarterback or an FCS offensive lineman, because he at least has flashed it on film rather than the kid that he's going off the sideways screen record video because he hasn't played. And so they're going to command more money. Now, if you're a high school kid, if you're a top tier kid, you're going to command more NIL collective. If you're a second tier kid, if you get an offer, your NIL is going to be your revenue sharing, and it's probably going to be minimal until you become the starter. And that's what I said. It's changed so much. And you're going to see better football being played in the Big Sky, which is already, in my opinion, the best FCS conference in the country. You're going to see better football in the G5. I mean, the Pac-12 is going to be fantastic with the Boise State and the San Diego State and the Fresno State, Colorado State, Utah State additions, in addition to Oregon State and Washington State, because those schools don't have the deep pockets that the Power 5 schools, but they're going to get really talented players who are basically not going to command the money at those Power 4 schools. So they're going to go there. The challenge will then be to pull what Boise State did with Ashton Genty and keep them there, because you may end up in a situation where you're Washington State and you lose the guy that you really developed for those 2 years in Cam Ward or in John Mateer. We saw it with Wayshawn Parker going into the portal. He goes to Wazoo. That was his only Power 4 offer at the time, or Power 5 offer. Goes to Washington State, rushes for 650, goes into the portal after 6 months on campus. Yeah. That's going to happen more often than not, and that's what those schools are going to have to prepare for.
Okay, so just real quick, if you can, high school elite quarterback, what's the market for them? Is it $1 million? Is it $500,000? And then to your point of the FCS or power, non-power 4 quarterback, is what their value now to elevate, do the Cam Ward in the modern era? What do you think that number is?
I think they're very similar numbers. And I think there's more confidence, though, in giving that to the FCS, the Cam Ward type, than the high school, because there still is. I mean, and you and I have talked about it. Your book was about it. There's been a number of guys that went on to be 5 stars that just didn't connect. Think about Boise State. Great example. Maddox Madsen is taking them to the playoffs in a first round bye. They had one of the biggest names in the portal a year ago, Malachi Nelson, go there. I guarantee you there was money invested in Malachi Nelson to come, whatever was left over to keep Ashton Genty there. But it's Maddox Madsen who's got them on the brink of, playing in the playoff semifinals. It has them in the playoffs. So there's still going to be some value to being a high-level high school quarterback if you go into the portal and you leave early enough. But there's going to be less money. It's only going to go to that elite. Those top 10, 15 quarterbacks, they're going to get paid. Okay. Yeah. 16 to 30 probably aren't going to do it unless they play. I've seen some of the numbers. I had an agent give me he had a quarterback, and there was 3 different offers from 3 different schools. And 2 of them were very front loaded. The third was, we're not going to front load this, but if you become the starter, this is what your value becomes. And it blew away those other 2 offers. So if you're smart and you play the long game, you might get that back end deal, but that would mean you have to wait 3 years to get that back end deal. Most guys are going to jump at the front end money. I mean, I get it. I understand. You're 17, 18. That money is life changing. You might not be the starter, but the second they drop you into the portal, your value has now dropped if you haven't seen the field. So you better have gotten that first year money, because that's not going to be as glamorous that second time. That's why you're seeing schools be more willing to go to the G5 and the FCS to find guys, because they're going to command higher value. But at least you're bringing them in, not needing them to sit behind for 3 years. You're bringing them in because that one guy is the missing piece. That's your Cam Ward. That's your Vernon Adams. Less likely to be a Dakota Prukop type. Dakota's taken a lot of strays the last couple of days, but that's the issue. For every Vernon Adams, they're going to have a Dakota Prukop who did not make that transition well from the FCS to the FBS. But,
okay, last college question for you, and then we will get to the high school guys before we cut you loose here. We're seeing a lot of guys say, I'm entering the portal, but I'm going to stay with my team through their playoff run. The academics just like, where does that land? Like if you play January 20th, you're in a semester, whether that's a quarter semester, a true semester, like you're not enrolled at one school, like, or are you? Like, do you have any intel? Because in my mind, I still go to the point of like, if you finish at a school, and this is my Jordan Addison example, like wins a Blitnikoff at Pitt, leaves Pitt after spring ball, gets lit up by that place, my alma mater, comes to SC, has a heck of a 6-8 months, becomes a first round pick, but I don't know if he has an alumni base. Like the coaches will always love on him as long as they're there, but I wonder about that. And then I think of the degree and the power of the degree. Like where does that even net out? And then do you have an answer on, can I be enrolled in 2 schools at the same time? Does it even matter anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when Jacob Eason went into the portal in 2018. It was after the 2017 season. He started the first game, gets hurt. Jake Fromm comes in, takes Georgia to the national championship game. And I remember talking with his dad in like mid-December when it was clear that Fromm was the starter. Jacob Eason was healthy, and he said, we're going to transfer. But if we lose in the Rose Bowl, it's going to make things easier. At that point, it was all of a done deal. He was going to Washington. But because Georgia beat Oklahoma in that Rose Bowl, and the national championship game was until like January 14th, he had to enroll in classes on January, 7th or 8th. So he couldn't leave Georgia and enroll at Washington until the next fall. So he basically spent 6 months once he dropped out of Georgia, but couldn't do spring football because he had already started classes at Georgia. He couldn't transfer. Then you have the case of Malik Murphy a year ago. If you remember, Malik put his name in the portal and essentially said, with Texas going to the playoffs, I know that my team needs me. I was the backup to Quinn Ewers this year, but I've got to take care of myself. And he went to Duke. So you're going to have cases. And I think a better example is Dylan Morris. Dylan Morris was planning to go into the portal in November of last year, but as Washington kept winning, his loyalty was to the school he grew up loving. And he ended up going to James Madison, I think, for the spring quarter. Maybe it helped that, Washington was on a quarter system. But he was going to be the backup, and you saw him on the sidelines. Even though we knew that he was already in the portal in December, he was there celebrating with Michael Penix at the Sugar Bowl. He was there with him in the national championship game. It was like, listen, I can still get to that school eventually, but I'm with these guys till the end. So from an academic standpoint, it's basically I'm just making sure I get to those classes, or somebody's taking my online classes for me or setting up those online classes for me. I'm not here to play school, as Cardale Jones once said.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll keep my opinion to myself on that. Okay, let's talk about the schools out west. According to the rankings at 24/7 where you work, only one of the top 10 recruits from California and 3 of the top 15 stayed in the former, I'll call it Pac-12 footprint. Curious about the realignment impact on the West Coast. Curious about Oregon, SC, UCLA, Washington when it comes to California, how those teams netted out from the high school perspective about a week ago on signing day.
Yeah, I mean, Oregon has been a national brand. If you go back to when Joey Harrington's poster was in Times Square, they've been a national brand. They've gotten #1 players from Southern schools, from Eastern states, from Midwest states regularly over the last probably 5 to 7 years, kind of coinciding with when Mario Cristobal took over and really going to another level with Dan Lanning. Alabama has 4 players in the top 15 from California. Texas A&M has 3 players from California in the top 15. Penn State has 2 players from the state of California in the top 15. That's 9 players. USC has 2. Okay, we understand Alabama because they're Alabama. They've been the standard bearer for the last 15 years. Kalen DeBoer has those West Coast ties. You kind of understand A&M. They've been kind of a hot name these last couple of years. Penn State's kind of the weird one, but one of those is LeVar Arrington Jr., so it kind of makes sense. The bigger issue is USC has 2. It has nothing to do with Alabama having 4 or A&M having 3. It's how has USC scuffled so much to recruit the in-state talent? And part of it's been Lincoln Riley's ties have been to Texas. They've been to the Southeast. So he's put a lot of time and effort in that region, gets commitments from those guys early. Well, then those guys at the end of the day realize, you know what? I want to stay in the South. Georgia sees that kid was committed to USC in February or March. Now we know what his market value is going to be. Now we know how much harder we have to recruit him. By the time USC pivots to the local kid who they now need to backfill that spot, he's already, I'm going to Oregon. Man, they've been on me since the beginning. I'm going to Washington. Washington did a great job in California this year. Brendan Carroll got 4 players from the West Catholic Athletic League, which is, in my opinion, the best league in Northern California. We all know about the Trinity League with Mater Dei and Bosco, but the West Catholic Athletic League with St. Ignatius, he got a player from there. He flipped from Texas. From Valley Christian, got an offensive lineman from there. From Archbishop Reardon, got 3 players from there. So they did a great job. And when you're a school like Washington, you look at USC and UCLA scuffling to recruit Southern California or Northern California. You see the Cal's not having as much success in their backyard. So you go in there. And then the problem is with your USC, UCLA, by the time you pivot to those West Coast kids and those in-state kids, they've already built a relationship months before with those other schools. Whereas Oregon just walks in with the polo, not unlike what Pete Carroll used to do. We used to joke that Pete Carroll didn't recruit, he evaluated. If he wanted a kid, he was getting the kid. He just had to make sure that he evaluated that kid right and that guy would be a good fit. That's where Dan Lanning and Oregon is at right now. If they put their claws into a kid, they're winning, they're producing NFL players, they're, everybody knows that they've got a very good NIL structure in place, but it's not just, I see this every time when a kid comes to Oregon, it's all about money. Well, for one thing, it's legal, but you don't think the first round picks that are now going to the NFL and being Pro Bowlers, the success that they've had under Dan Lanning plays into that at all? Yeah, it absolutely does. They're going to have a Heisman finalist for the 2nd straight year. They're the number 1 overall seed. They're the only unbeaten team left. So that's what's happening is Oregon is recruiting like a monster right now. They are the one that's cracking the ceiling with the Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State kind of triumvirate that has been dominating recruiting. Oregon is now about to have the number 1 class in the Big Ten for the 2nd straight year. But remember, those Pac-12 schools are going to scuffle going to the Big Ten, right? Well, here's Oregon saying, oh, that was easy to win the conference. We won it without losing. We just had the best recruiting class in 2 years. So Oregon is just on another level recruiting-wise. USC is going to have to address this philosophy at some point. But in this era where you can use the portal, is local recruiting as important? Or do you recruit those national guys and then you hope that local kid you wanted is miserable at his other schools, so when he decides to go into the portal, he does want to come back home? That's kind of where they're at weighing. UCLA, I think this year's an incomplete given how late in the process they started. They still end up with a top 35 class, complete difference from the Chip Kelly years. But schools like Oregon, schools like Washington, they've got a philosophy and it's working.
Yeah, that's really well said. Another thing that's always worked is the impact you have on people. I see your T-shirt, Avery Huffman. We all know about the DIPG Foundation that was founded after she tragically passed away and impacted so many of us, you most and your family most importantly. What has it been like for you to continue to see the impact that your daughter has had through the lens of sport and your craft to so many people, me and our entire audience included?
It's incredible because here we are 10 years almost since she was diagnosed. It's been almost 9 years since she passed away. And I'll still have guys that'll hashtag, Avery Sean when they send me a message. We have camps every year. There's 7-on-7 tournaments. And you win a trophy, you're going to hear a speech about Avery. And, it's one of those things where CJ Carr, who was an Elite 11 finalist 2 years ago, is now at Notre Dame. His brother, Chad, died of the same thing that Avery did. We got connected with his family. And, I'll have kids that, like, my sister got diagnosed with cancer. Can I connect my parents with you? Not to talk about football recruiting, but just to talk about that. And so, there's an empathy that comes from many of these players. And so it's been awesome that here we are 8-9 years later, and I'm still able to share her story. And I'm still, you have these camps, and I'll have college coaches say, hey, we were going to do our own camp that way, but we're going to come to the Avery Strong Showcase because we want to support your foundation. Well, what that's doing is now giving those kids an opportunity to essentially audition in front of coaches that they wouldn't have been able to audition before, all because these guys want to support our foundation. And now these kids are going to have their dreams realized as a result of that. And, you know, somebody who's worked with high school age players for 20 plus years, I love that. I love that I get to share her story, but I love that guys get to pursue their dreams because she didn't get a chance to pursue her dreams. And that's the one thing I share. Don't waste your opportunities, guys. If you have the opportunity to fulfill your dream and play the sport you love for as long as possible, I know a kid that would have given anything to get out of that wheelchair and just run around. So pursue and hone in on those dreams and thrive in those dreams, because there are so many kids that didn't get that chance, and now you have the chance. Don't waste it, which is why the portal a lot of times kind of bums me out, because like, man, is this really the best decision that you're making? There's a lot of guys that are making good decisions, but then there's a lot that's like, this was such a dream to you. This was so important to you 4 years ago, and now you're not pursuing it or not doing it with the same vigor you did a few years ago. That bums me out. Go pursue those dreams and keep listening, and let me tell Avery's story to you to maybe inspire you to do the same.
Yeah, man, that's a beautiful sentiment. And I know her impact is still felt dramatically. And what's cool is that the players are still sharing stories and learning about her. Coaches, I think, will always do that because of their relationship with you and how much all of us in the media adore you and have gotten to know you over the years. But it's saying something when you continue to transcend the next generation and do it by sharing, you know, powerful stories from your daughter. Thank you for coming on, man. You know how
Absolutely.
I feel about you. And we always do this at least once a year where we talk recruiting, talk football. But my favorite part is always hearing what the latest is with the Avery Strong Foundation. And thanks again for your time, man.
It's my favorite part to share too, Yogi, and I appreciate you every year giving me that opportunity to share about it, because I know I was telling you guys out there, I still got my life on a wall, or a life in a walk poster on my wall, and I walk out of my office every day on the door and I see people that had written bravery, Avery Strong on it, and it brings a smile to my face.
Beautiful. Well, you do that to us as well. Everybody will go ahead, if you're not already, follow Brandon Huffman for all things football and life. We love that about him, the intersection of both. Brandon, thanks for the time, brother. Lots of love. And make sure you get a little candy from Stanko's desk right there in the corner office.
You got it. Thanks, Yogi.
It's the Afterglow. Jim Thornby, I'm Yogi Roth. That was Brandon Huffman, brought to you by our founding partner, 76, keeping you in the know on the go, go, go. We literally caught him on the go from Nashville at 24/7 headquarters. Had some fun with that, and our good friend Adam Stanko and company. We love all those people that do an incredible job. They really do set the bar in recruiting. Brandon does that on a bunch of levels. He's also got a beautiful human element with the Avery Strong Foundation that is in honor of his late daughter. It's very inspiring. That website is, of course, in our show notes. Make sure you check that out if you're looking for some inspiration, or if you do want to contribute and support an incredible, incredible foundation and great cause in her honor. With that said, Jim, your biggest takeaway from our conversation with Brandon Huffman?
I mean, it's like I said to him right after we finished that interview. I mean, that was a PhD in modern day recruiting, and just and just learning, you know, because it has, as he said, it has changed so radically. I mean, I can remember us doing our first, you know, signing day show together. What was that, in spring of 2013?
No thanks.
And thinking about like how that worked in, you know, that February of 2013. And, you know, learning about the prospects and getting all that stuff together, and just how far everything has come since that day. And Brandon just has that all down on lock, which is great, because like literally last week at the championship game, like I talked to people. I was just like, hey, so like, how was recruiting last week? And they're like, oh, it was just a blur. It was kind of a blur for everybody. So it was great to kind of like take that week, you know, step back a week, be able to look back at it and kind of really put a bow on the whole thing.
Yeah, he's fascinating. And I think it was really cool for everybody just to get a clear understanding of the state of the game. It's fluid, as we know, but I think it's becoming more and more solidified. And you hear it all the time, but it's actually true. I think now it's becoming more and more of a professional model. The thing I took away is, like, he said, cap expert. That had me stand up a little bit. Like, you're right. So these general managers, or that front office, if you will, there's an evaluator, there's a negotiator, right, who's navigating that conversation with agents. I thought what he said of like, you don't see pictures next to the Christmas tree. Like I remember Tanner McKee and Tavita Pritchard. Like I don't know why that one pops into my mind when he was getting recruited at Stanford back in the day. That is not the case anymore. It's conversations with agents and representation around figures, right? Not formations, if you will, and I think that was something that really stood up for me. And then navigating that, like I do have a lot of empathy, and I hope that our fans have that for your program, because you might be like, can't believe we lost our star running back or our future left tackle or our starting left tackle. Well, also there's a reality of like, you've got to manage your budget. It's not just an end all be all free for all financially. You have to have some discipline around it. And some places might value that, call it right tackle, as the number one player on their board. But you love the young guy that you have who just finished his redshirt freshman season. Like I look at USC, they lost their right tackle. I don't know the reality around it, but it might be like, hey, somebody's offering an insane deal to this young man. They recruited, I think, 7 offensive linemen 2 classes ago. They might like that foundational group that's entering their 3rd year and say, okay, like we got to make a deal there. All right, that's how the NFL works. It's just never as dramatic, or as probably like, I don't know what the word is, but it's like, here's the portal, like in the NFL, it's like contract is expiring and we're not going to re-up. I'm like, it's way calmer and way more professional than I think what the world that we're observing right now in college recruiting.
Yeah, and it's funny too. You talked about the executive side of things, but the quote that I'm still kind of laughing about that Brandon had talking about the agents is like, you have a lot of guys with an Instagram account who can't rent a car. Like it's it's not all the big time guys. Yes, you're dealing with like real agents, but so many of these guys are dealing with guys that are probably in over their heads and giving these student athletes bad advice.
Yeah. And there's a strategy. Like we'll bring Brandon back on in the spring. Like if I'm an offensive lineman, right? Or if I'm an edge rusher, those are the 2 most valuable positions. So right now, here's the first run at those guys. Well, there's going to be a huge run at a very select group of players in the spring. And I understand why there's a second window in the portal, because coaches will take jobs late after the portal closes, I think December 27th. If memory serves me right.
I'm not sure on that date, but yeah.
I think it's right around there. So there's going to be coaching movement in the new year. We just know that. That's going to happen. I don't know where, I don't know how, but it always will. It will shock everybody. And then there's going to be a 30-day window where that entire roster can dip out of there. So there needs to be that second portal window because of the way college football is structured right now. So why do I say that? And I don't like that I'm saying this, but if you were advising an edge rusher, a premier position, one of the ones that he referenced, right? Quarterback, edge rusher, tackle, and emerging wide receiver, you might say, well, just hang on, because your value, what you can get, might be even higher in the spring. I hate that that's coming out of my mouth, but that is reality of where we sit today. I think the ones that win, Jim, will be the ones that are the most disciplined. I think the programs that have a hard edge about this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to attack it, we win, we lose, whatever, this is what we're going to do. I think those are the ones that win. I think the ones that ebb and flow too much will probably get out leveraged and might find a roster that isn't to the exact specifications of the desires. I could be wrong, but that's my hunch after talking to a bunch of people over the last week and a half.
Yeah, as long as we don't start getting like franchise tags in college sports, then that's when you know that we've truly lost the plot of this whole thing.
A reminder, as Ryan Leaf said earlier this week, the 1% of the 1% of the 1% of the 1% find their way to the NFL. So I applaud you on trying to make your money, but please let's not forget, really your greatest value is going to come from the community you build in college further down the line. It's coming from 2 guys over 40 years old, at least here on the West Coast. Okay, there it is. That was Brandon Huffman. He is Jim Thornby. I am Yogi Roth. We are off to New York City. Final road trip of the season, or at least of the calendar year. I will be working the Rose Bowl. Jim, I am so excited. We're going to go crush in New York, take a couple days off after that, and regroup for the first round of the playoffs. Lots of love. Thanks for all the love and support. And we wish you the best of luck as your portal continues to evolve.